Well, it goes without saying that the stakes of Sunday's vote are high. It'll determine not only how Europe's biggest economy is run for the next 4 years, but will also surely have an effect on the continent's response to an increasingly hostile Trump administration. As we saw in those reports there, though, immigration has largely dominated both the campaigning and the debates, even though multiple polls suggest that the state of the economy is actually the number one issue on on voters' minds, though immigration, of course, is not far behind. Well, Armin Steinbach joins us on the program. He's the Jean Monnet Professor of Law and Economics at HEC Business School here in Paris. Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor. I'd like to start by asking you just very briefly, what do you think are the major concerns for voters from their perspective in Sunday's vote? What are they most concerned about?
I would identify three very important topics. The first one is international security and peace. Obviously, this refers to the situation with Ukraine. People in Germany are also getting tired of the war. They would like to see a solution to this. This is a primary topic. Second topic, the economy. Everybody realized that the German business model has to be reinvented. The German business model built on gas from Russia, security from the US, and free markets in China. This doesn't exist anymore. And the third topic is the migration issue, which in the last couple of weeks has indeed dominated the political debate.
So like you said, I mean, immigration is, of course, an easy scapegoat, and Germany isn't alone in that. But to what extent is the rise of the far right that we're seeing in Germany also kind of a backlash against some neoliberal economic policies over the past couple of decades? You just said that Germany needs to kind of reinvent a business model of sorts. But how have things like lowering pensions, allowing for the expansion of a low-wage labor sector, and restricting employment rights or other austerity measures, how has this kind of impacted the economic situation and people's reaction to it today?
Certainly, the AfD also benefited from the dissatisfaction that results from the economic performance in Germany. Mostly they blame the European Union for this, the open markets for this. But certainly, if you look at the recipes that parties come up with, they do not want to basically change the German business model. They want to refresh it in a way. The classical refreshment meaning that center-left parties are in favor of debt-funded investment and subsidies, while the center-right parties hope for positive effects of deregulation and on growth and financed by tax cuts.
How do you think I think there's growing attention, particularly in the United States, to the way that the coronavirus years kind of radicalized people and pushed them further towards the right. How do you think that coronavirus restrictions and policies affected the situation in Germany, both in terms of how Germans are voting and in terms of the effects that those years had on the German economy?
These are certainly two different effects. The first one is that among citizens, the pandemic measures, the constraints that they had to accept, somehow triggered certain suspicion against the government, a suspicion that was then fueled by the AfD, by the populists, and this leads to their success, clearly. On the economic side, yes, since the pandemic, the German economy has been stagnating, right? We're looking now at the third year in a row with a zero growth or negative growth. Industrial production has not really recovered from the pandemic. So we are not taking off. The economy is not taking off. And this is another reason that fuels in favor of AfD, the populist party.
Speaking of reasons that kind of fuel the favor of the AfD, do you think that the economic divide between the East and the West is still as stark as it was in the past? If so, what's driving that? And I imagine if there are still big divisions between those regions, that it's more in one than in the other, that there's more support for AfD.
Certainly, you see a big difference. The AfD much stronger in Eastern Germany than in Western Germany. However, if you look at the economic data, obviously over the last decades, the East converged towards the Western in economic terms. However, you see, especially in rural areas, a very high degree of lack of perspectives from an individual perspective and underperformance in economic terms. And these are the regions where, like here in France with Le Pen and the Rassemblement National, where the AfD is very strong.
It would be impossible to talk about the economic component of these elections without mentioning the automobile sector. It's, of course, one of the major reasons that Germany is the economic powerhouse that it is today, but it's in crisis. Can you talk about how shifts in the industry have put pressure on the German economy?
Certainly, the German business model built on cheap gas from Russia, and Germany is an economy largely built on the manufacturing industry and especially energy-intensive industries, and they are suffering. Their products are not competitive anymore. They think about moving out of Germany, and this is the pressure they build on the government to take measures that brings electricity prices down in order to make the economy and this sector, this manufacturing sector, competitive again.
You mentioned or hinted at high energy costs. They're also a recurring theme. Have these high energy costs made the prospect of a nuclear energy revival in Germany any more realistic? And how much do you personally, as an economist, think that a return to nuclear power would ease the burden on German citizens and German industries struggling with high energy costs?
The answer to your first question, whether there's political feasibility about nuclear energy, my answer is clearly no. There will be no going back to nuclear energy. The only party that really wants that is the AfD. The CDU talks about this being an option, but any other party fiercely refuses to go back, which from an economic perspective is not a compelling argument. We know that nuclear energy is cheaper than coal and other fossil energy. So there's no real reason to deny nuclear energy to be one element of decarbonization of the economy. But the German political sentiment is clearly such that this would not be possible.
To change gears now, sir, far-right parties, of course, including the FD, like to connect immigration to the economy by claiming that immigrants are taking away German jobs, draining the social security system by collecting benefits. But in Germany, declining birth rates has surely been a consideration for some of the more generous immigration programs that we've seen, at least from an economic perspective. How do you judge the legacy of the so-called Willkommenskultur, this idea of seeing migrants as an economic resource? And please forgive me for my poor German pronunciation.
Your pronunciation is just excellent. I mean, certainly you mentioned the demographic problem, and that is the whole irony in this current debate. Germany needs skilled workers. Germany needs skilled migration. And the atmosphere that is currently taking place in Germany is a deterrent atmosphere. So we are really cutting in our own flesh, if you wish so. So open borders, migration coming in is the solution, one solution to the demographic problem.
Have you seen it as an economic success, the mass kind of welcoming of migrants that we saw starting in 2015?
Certainly, this has not been a positive effect on voters' political perception. Certainly, measures must be taken. Migration policies must be strengthened and sharpened in order to make sure that it's primarily skilled migration that comes into Germany. However, if you close the border, you create the atmosphere for any migrant in Germany to be not a nice one, to be one that is against migrants in Germany. And this is a sentiment that Germany cannot afford in its current economic situation.
Professor Steinbach, I have plenty more questions for you, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, too.